Hello everyone! In today's video we are continuing our cross series, and this video will focus on the adjacent color patterns that you can find when solving the cross. And we will specifically be looking at two pieces in the same face when you're solving the cross when they are adjacent colors to each other. The previous video discussed all the opposite color patterns, and this video will cover all the adjacent color patterns. So if you have not watched the previous video, please go watch that. It explains in the introduction of the video, the first 5 minutes of it, what these videos are really about and the content that will be covered. And we're building our knowledge, so this is just a continuation of the last video. It was just too long to put in one video. So there's a lot to cover. Let's get started. The first case we're going to cover is the case where you have adjacent colors, they're touching each other, and you don't have any whites facing you. And this has basically one unique case, because when it's in the top on the right, or on the right and the bottom, or on the bottom and the left, or the left and the top, they're all basically the same concept that we're learning. So I'll show you the top right one, and you can convert all those moves to all the other cases. And how we're going to do this one is we're going to, first we have to determine the orientation of the case. So we need to determine if this red goes on the right of blue or the left of blue, because that's going to determine one of your D moves in this case. So how we're going to solve this case is we're going to place the closest edge to the bottom in the bottom. So we're going to place that in the bottom, and then we need to determine where this piece is going to land. So we know red needs to go to the right of blue, so we need to push blue to the left, and then we can push red down. So again, we're going to put one of our piece closest to the bottom, we're going to put it in the bottom. So if it's already here, then that step's already done. So we're going to put our piece closest to the bottom in the bottom. We're going to move the bottom layer in relation to the color of this piece. Since they're adjacent colors, we can't just do the same moves, we have to take orientation into account. And in order for red to be on the right of blue, we need to push blue that direction. So we'll do a D prime and then do an F. Now I always do these with the right moves if I can help it. So in this case I would put it on the right, I would put the D down, move it out of the way, and then over. That way it's kind of a quick thing to do. So that's when it's in the upper right hand corner. When it's in the lower right hand corner, really this is a lot easier, because then you're just moving this in relation to where it's at on the cube. So if you D, F. If it's here, you're doing the same thing, you're just moving this one in relation. So we're going to move this one over and then drop the blue. That's two moves. And then here's the same, we're just going to drop the one closest to the bottom. So here's the one closest to the bottom, so we'll drop that. We have to move this in the correct direction and then drop. And most of the time I do this with the right side, because it's easier to do your D moves with your pinky back here, or your ring finger back here. So you just... And this also works if it's oriented the other way, or if they're set up a little differently. So now the blue's on top and the red's on the right, so we know we're going to put our red down first. So we pick the one closest to the bottom, put the red down, move this to the correct position, and then move the blue down. So you have to know your color scheme, but you should be able to, if you had centers, you should be able to tell where these go. So we're going to just solve the case. The next case we're going to cover is when you have one white facing you and they're still touching. And this has a clockwise version and a counterclockwise version. So if you look at the white face, the other piece is clockwise to the white face. That's still clockwise, that's still clockwise, still clockwise. And then you have the counterclockwise version, where if you look at the white face, the other piece is counterclockwise. Well, we're not going to do the counterclockwise version, because when we cover the clockwise version, you can either have a oriented or a non-oriented version of this case. So in this case, this is oriented because we can solve it in two moves. We know red goes to the right of blue, so we can just move this blue down and then insert the red. So that's the oriented version. But if this was an orange piece, then we would need to do a different set of moves. So the different set of moves is very similar to the counterclockwise version for the oriented case. So I'm going to show you the oriented and non-oriented version for all the clockwise versions, and then you can convert all these to the counterclockwise versions. So if this was an orange piece, then you would just move it down and over here. So it's the same. If this was oriented, you'd move it down and over, or over and down, is the same thing as this one, where you're just moving it over and down. So I hope that made sense. You can convert all of these cases into either the left hand or the oriented counterclockwise version. For this case, this one's actually really easy. This is one of your goals that you want to get, and it's two adjacent pieces and the one white facing you. If they're oriented, this is the best case to get, or one of the best cases to get. So plan your cross starting from this. But in this case, all we're going to do is we're just going to move this piece down, and that will convert this bad edge into a good edge, and then we'll move this one down. And the other way you can do it is if you rotate the cube to the side and put it on the side, then you can move this center piece up to match with your blue, and then move this red over with the U prime move. So depends on what you want. This one's nice because it doesn't move this whole section here, so if you have another piece over here, you know it's going to stay there. So, or like that. So that's when it's in the top. If it's in the right, then this is easy. We're either just moving this down if it's oriented, and if it's not oriented, then we will do a fat U2 and then move it down. And because if this was orange, it would have to go here. So we can either do if this is not oriented, so orange, if this was orange and it needs to go over here, then we would do a fat U2 and then down, or a D2. I don't know if you can see that, but D2 and then down, and that would solve it relative to each other, because if this was orange, then this would be correct. So that's when it's on the right. When it's on the bottom, basically we're just setting up the previous case. You would either, if it's oriented, so if red goes to the right of blue, then you would just F and then down, and there's your two moves to solve it. If this was orange, then it would need to go over here, so we would just do an F prime, insert this down, and then a F2. So again, we're either setting this case up, or we're setting this case up. So if this was oriented correctly, which it is, and if it's not oriented correctly, we would move it over here, and then down. And that's when the white's on bottom, and then when the white is on the left. If it is oriented correctly, so let's say this was an orange piece, then you would just move this orange down and then move this blue down. So you can do orange and blue. But it's not orange, it's red, and needs to go over here, so we would just do an F2 and then down. So you're always doing an F2 with this case. You're either doing an L F2 or an F2 R prime. So it depends on if it's oriented or not. And that's all the cases where you have one white facing you, and they're adjacent colors, and they're touching. And the counterclockwise versions is basically the same. So this counterclockwise version is the same as the previous one I just did, where if this is oriented, which it is, red goes to the right of blue, you can just move this down in. But if it's not, if it went over here, if it was orange, then you would just F2 L. So the moves are the same, you're just doing it in a little different manner. So that's this case where you have adjacent, one white facing you. The next case we're going to cover is when you have two white faces in the same face, and this is one of the worst cases you can get because it's a minimum 4 moves for the non-oriented version, and it's 3 moves for the oriented version. So if you see this case, avoid this case. This is one of the worst cases to get. There's 2 unique versions of this case. You have where you have a white in the top layer and a white in the middle layer, so this pattern is the same as this pattern, basically. And then you have one where it's in the middle layer and the bottom layer, and both of those are the similar patterns. So you have them on the right and the bottom, and then you have them in the left and the bottom. So they're very similar, so we'll just cover the 2 unique cases. When the top and the middle layer, if it's oriented correctly, so if you put this straight down and you put this straight down, then blue would be to the left of red, and that's correct. So what we would do is we would just place this bad edge over this piece on the same face. So we would move this over like that, and then now when you insert this one, it converts that bad edge into a good edge, and then you can just place it. So again, 1, 2, 3. So that's not terrible. If this was an orange piece, then this is where it requires 4 moves, because you're doing the same thing. So you're going to move this over, you're going to put this down, but if this is orange, it needs to go over here. So we'd put this down, and then we have to do a D2, and then do an F prime move, or an F move, and then if this was orange, then that would be oriented correctly. So again, and if it's oriented, you just place this over, and down, and down. One other way you can do this if it's oriented is you can do the same move to place it over the piece, but instead of doing an R prime F, you can do a MU, and that will also orient these cases. So white's facing you, but sometimes that's fine. So you can either do an R prime F or a MU if it's this case. Basically, you're just setting up this case and then solving this case from the right angle, because this one's bad. So if you have it in the middle layer and the bottom layer, we're going to do something very similar, but instead of moving the top face over the other piece, we're going to move the bottom piece under the other piece. So we'll move this one here, and then we'll insert this one. That'll convert this bad edge into a good edge, and then we can just insert that one like that. And if it's red, then that's oriented correctly, so that's how we would solve that case. If it's not oriented correctly, then again, this is a bad case. We would have to move this over, and then instead of moving this down, we would move this up. If this was orange, then we would insert it, and then place this blue down with an R2. So one more time, if it's not oriented correctly, so let's say this was orange, then we would place it underneath, move this up instead of down, place your orange, and then place your blue. If it's oriented, then we just put it over, insert. If it's not oriented, we would put it underneath, move this up, insert this one, and then down. And that's 4 moves, and that's why this is a bad case. The next cases we're going to cover are when they're not touching each other, and this one is where you don't have any whites facing you, and they're not adjacent or touching to each other, they're on the opposite sides of the cube. And you have 2 unique cases for this one. You have it when it's in the left and the right, and then you have it when it's on the top and the bottom. So for the top and the bottom is really easy. It's you move the D layer in relative to where this one is, and then you just insert this one. So we know red goes to the right of blue, so we'll just move this to the right, and then F2 to insert it. But I like to always put these on the right because it's easy to do a D move with your ring finger, and then R2 to solve. So there's that one where you just do D, R2 rather. And then if this was orange, you just push the D the other direction, so you just do a D prime, then R2, and that solves it relative to each other. So that's if it's in the left or the right. If it's in the top or the bottom, all you're doing is converting it this and then solving, because this is only a 2-move insert. So you would just do either this, if this was orange, or you would put this one down first, and then D, and then place this one. So for the left and the right, it's if you do an R prime or a R is really dependent on, because I always like to do a D with my ring finger. I think pushing is a little more awkward than pulling, so I always want to pull. So if we put the D down first, then we're going to pull that over. So if this was orange, then I would do an R prime to put the blue first, pull, and then insert if this was orange. Since this is red, I want to put the red down first because I know I'm going to do a D, so I'm going to take whatever is in this position here and put it back here. So, and the next move I'll do is move this down. So I'll move this down, D, and then R2 to move that down. So that's how you solve opposite, no whites facing. The next case we're going to cover is when you have one white facing you and they're not touching each other. And you have 3 unique cases of this. You have one where the white's on the top, you have the one where the white's on the bottom, and then you have the left and right hand versions. And this is a pretty good case to know because there's a lot of variations to it, and it's a pretty flexible case, and it's a pretty decent case too. You can always solve it in 3 cases. It's a quick, easy insertion as well. So if this is the best case that you have, then I would say this is a good case to start with, because you use 1, 2 to solve it. So 2 moves to solve a case is pretty good. Now we're going to start with white on top first. For white on top, you have to look at your bottom color and determine where this piece goes in relation to your bottom color. So if this goes on the right, then we would just move this to the right area, insert, and then fix the one that was solved. So we're just going to break this one by converting this bad edge into a good edge. We're going to insert it, and then we're going to replace this one. So if this was orange, then that would be correct. So if this is an orange piece, then we can move this over here, down, and down. But since it's a red piece, we know blue needs to go to the left of red, so we'll just put it on the left face. So it's kind of easy to tell where the piece goes, because you look at this piece, where does blue go in relation to red? It goes on the left, so I'm just going to move this to the left, down, and then refix this one. And when white's on top, easy finger trick for this one is if let's say I'm putting it here, so you just move it down with your thumb, R or R prime, and then use the F move with your finger. So it's it's pretty quick 3 moves, and then if it goes on the left hand side, you do the same thing. When white's on the bottom and they're not touching each other, and this is kind of conceptually the same as the last case we just looked at, where we're moving this relative to this piece. So if we know blue goes on the left of red, then we'll just move this to the left. We'll insert this, and then we'll insert this. If blue goes to the right of this piece, so if let's say this was orange, then we're going to move this to the right, insert, and then insert that last piece. So this one's very similar to this one. You're moving this white edge. You're converting this bad white edge into a good white edge based on where it is relative to this color. So if this is red, then we know blue goes to the left of red, so we just move it to the left, down, and then down. And then if blue went to the right of this color, then we would just move it to the right, insert, and then insert. And that's when blue's on, or white piece is on bottom. And the last one white facing you is when it's in the middle layer, and it can be on the left or the right. So the white can be on the left or the white can be on the right, but they're mirrors of each other. So if the white's on the right, it's the same moves as the white's on the left. It's just you have to convert the moves for you. So we're going to look at when the white's on the left, and I'm going to show you a couple different ways to solve each oriented and non-oriented, because this is a pretty decent case. So if you see this case, it's a good starting point for your cross. And if it's oriented, the first way you can solve this is if this color goes to the right of this color, then we know we can just insert this one down, and then insert this one down, and then they're oriented correctly. So that's the first way to solve it. So the second way to solve it is if you place it like this, you can move this right face up, perform an M move, and then one U prime move will solve this relative to each other as well. So might not be beneficial, but it might be. It is one more move, and it leaves you with white facing you, but sometimes you might want that. So again, we'll just R, M, U, or open. And the last way to solve this is if you just take this whole fat R and move it up, and then you can just perform a U move, and that solves that case too. That does move both of these layers, but it doesn't touch any of these pieces here. So if you notice that you have other pieces here that you care about, then it won't move any of those. You just move this entire face up, and then move it over, and that solves that as well. So, and I think that's the way I do it most of the time, either just down and down, or a fat move, because it's doing the same thing. So you're either moving this down, which is basically moving this whole fat edge up. So move this down and then an F, or move this whole thing up, which is just doing this, but you're just moving this instead, and then a U move. And that's for the oriented version. For the non-oriented version, so let's say this was an orange piece instead of a red piece, we know that the orange needs to go to the left of blue, so it needs to go back here instead of here. So what we would do is we can do this a couple different ways. We can either drop this down, perform a D2, and then insert this last edge. So again, we drop this down, move it to where it's supposed to go, because if this is orange, we know blue goes to the right of orange. So we would drop this, D2, and then an R move will do it. Sorry, F move will do it. And then if you place this on the right face, you can F, D2, R will solve the non-oriented version of this case. The other way to solve this case is if you know these need to be inserted flipped. So if this is orange, then I can F2 to convert it to the oriented version of this case, and then just solve. So if this was orange, and this is the case, so white's on the right, then this is a 2-move insert, because we know we would just move this down, then we move this down, and if this was orange, this would be oriented correctly. So if you have this case, you're 1 move away from setting that other case up. So you just F2, then move this down, and move this down. And then if that was orange, then this would be oriented correctly. And then finally, one last way to solve this case, if this is orange, so it's not oriented correctly, is if you place the U face towards you, and then you do one M move to move this white center next to the blue. And then now, if this is orange, we need to put the orange back here, so we just R prime and then B prime. So again, if you have this case, you can place it on the bottom, and you can do an M move and R prime, and then now we're just inserting this here. And then that's, if this was orange, that would be oriented correctly. The last case we're going to cover is when you have two whites facing you and the colors are adjacent. And this, again, is one of the worst cases you can get. So anytime you see two whites facing you and they're adjacent colors, even if they're touching or they're not touching, then it's a bad case, and try to find a better case out there, because this one, again, is 3 or 4 moves, depends on if it's oriented or not. And it really depends on if it's in the top or the bottom or the left or the right. So for this case, if it's in the top or the bottom, all you're going to do is convert it to the left or the right case, and then solve this case, if you have to. I would suggest trying to find another one, but if this is all you got, then if it's in the top and the bottom layer, well, all you're going to do is convert it to the middle layer, and then solve for the middle layer. Now, how you can do this is, you know that both of these need to go down, and one of them needs to be moved next to the other. So if I move, so let's say this is red, which it is, right? So I'll move this down, and then I know red needs to go right here because it needs to go to the right of the blue. So I'll just move this down and over, and then move my blue down. So there's my 3 moves for this. So here's, when it's in the middle layer, you'd move this down, and then move it either here or here. If it's orange, then it would need to go back here. If it's red, it needs to go here. So, and then you would insert your blue piece. And if this was orange, you would do the same thing. You would just drop this down, put it in the back with the D move, and then you would drop this down. So if this was orange, then these would be oriented correctly. And then if you have it in the top and the bottom layer, really there's no good way to do this. You just need to convert it to this case and then solve accordingly. And if you convert those moves, you can place the yellow facing towards you, and then we're placing this D down, back, and then an M move. So it's doing the same moves, but you're just doing it from a different angle. So you have this case, and then we're basically doing the same thing. So we'll drop this, move this over, and then drop it. But we'll do that when it's like this. So we'll push this down, move it over, and then move this whole fat face. And that will solve those two as well. And I think that's it for this video. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. The next video is going to cover some of the 3-piece patterns that I've noticed, and we'll also cover some of the patterns when they're in the top, because we've only ever talked about 2 in the same face, so on the right face or the front face, but there are some patterns that are, if they're in the top face, then it's easy to solve as well. So I'm not going to cover every possible variation like I did on the side faces, but there are some that add value, and if you can recognize the pattern, they're pretty easy to solve. And then again, like I said, there are some 3-piece patterns that I've noticed that if you know the solution, you can quickly and easily solve all 3 cases or all 3 pieces in just a few moves. So we'll cover that as well. We will also talk about practice tips, and I will very briefly cover color neutrality. I plan on having a couple videos just dedicated specifically to color neutrality after my cross series, but I will touch on that. And then we will start to talk about what's next for the cross series. I plan on doing a pair preservation, a cross F12 transition video on how to track pieces and how to track corners and your edges, and then how to preserve pairs, and then we'll get into some of the more advanced block building and X-cross techniques that I've learned. So we're only a couple of videos away from the actual X-cross. I know this has been a long series, but I wanted to make sure that we were as thorough as possible, and I do think that pattern recognition adds a lot of value to the cross, because if you can start to see the cross as just a series of patterns, then it makes it a lot easier. It just makes it easier to construct the cross on the fly, and then you can start looking into additional pieces, so your first pair. So, and that'll be in the next video. If you have any questions or comments, like I said, leave them in the description. And until then, happy cubing!